Hi, and welcome to Woodshop Journey. In this video, we'll be building a mahogany bench seat to replace the one for this old metal bench where the seat rusted out pretty badly. The question is, can wood replace rust? This is our 8-year-old park bench that has held up pretty well since we got it. However, the bench seat has a problem with rust. The problem being, well, it's mostly rust. Since my wife and I enjoy sitting outside on the porch and we like this bench, I decided to try and salvage this old thing and replace the rust with wood. I set about taking the bench seat off and taking it to the shop and figuring out what needs to be done to make this decision a reality. I began with getting measurements of the original bench seat because I wanted to replace it with something very similar in appearance. My biggest concern was whether wood cut to similar dimensions as the original metal bench seat would have the strength needed to support weight safely. I chose mahogany because it's not only a great wood for being out in the elements, but it's also a strong wood under stress. With the measurements made and the wood chosen, it was time to start breaking material down. I began with cutting down the pieces I'd use for the ends of the seat to connect with the remaining frame and a center support piece that I hoped would add strength and stability to the slats that run from side to side. Using the frame of the original bench seat as a pattern for the supports, I traced out the shape and added some extra material to the bottom of the tracing as compensation for the difference in strength between the steel and wood. I used a jigsaw to cut off excess material from the first and second support pieces, but decided to use a combination of my radial arm saw and the jigsaw on the third. It was much quicker and easier this way. After cutting away the excess, I used the first support I cut and shaped as a guide, and with the router and a pattern bit, shaped the other two pieces to match. I finished shaping the three of them by clamping them together, then using my sander to shape them into mostly identical pieces. Using the original bench seat as a template once again, I marked the locations for the mounting bolts on the two end pieces. I set up my drill press with a Forstner bit, then drilled 1/4 inch deep holes at each location to create a recess for the nut and washer, followed by a drill bit to create a smaller hole all the way through each board for the bolts to pass through. Next, I moved on to cutting out the seat slats. I cut the slats down to width using the table saw, then moved over to the bench and set up the router, where I used a roundover bit on the top two side edges of each piece. This will give the final piece a more finished look as well as make it more comfortable to sit on. I left the bottom of each slat with the squared edges to give more stability and allow as much gluing surface as possible during the final assembly. With all the pieces cut, I lightly wet them with water to pop the grain, then lightly sand them down to their final finish with 220 sandpaper. The water soaks into the more porous wood, causing the fibers to swell and raise up, and the light sanding knocks those raised fibers back down to match the less porous wood. All of this prevents the fibers from swelling up later when the finish is applied and ensures you get a smooth finish. With that done, I decided to do a dry fit to sort out the positioning of the bench slats on the supports and get a first glance at how the bench seat will look. Again, I used the original seat as a guide to help position both the supports and the slats. At this point in the build, I also decided it might be wise to move past just a dry fit and actually put the seat together and test it out. I'm still concerned about how strong the seat will actually be, and the only way to know is to put it together and test it. After marking all the pieces for positioning, I drill all the holes with a countersink bit, followed by a drill bit to ensure the screw heads are recessed below the surface and to prevent splitting of the wood. Next, I screw 1 1/4 inch exterior grade screws, snug but not too fully tightened, and assemble the bench seat for the first time. Using the original park bench hardware, I install the new bench seat into place on the bench and test it out for any flex. And man, does it flex. A lot. Using just my hands to press down on the bench seat, it's quickly evident that the wood slats are not going to match the original steel and that some sort of bracing other than the center support is going to be needed. While contemplating a solution to the flex in the wood and still hoping to keep the original design elements of the park bench intact, I settle on adding cross braces to the underside of several slats. This will strengthen the bench seat, and by placing the braces toward the back of each slat, the overall appearance of the design won't be changed. That decided, I set about cutting the pieces, fitting them into the assembled seat, and testing out my theory with a live stress test using me as the test subject. The moment of truth, and it works. There's still more flex than I'd like. However, I'll address that after the build using some flat steel to connect the slats across the center support. Problem created, problem solved. With my self-imposed dilemma resolved, it's time to move on to the finish and assembly. For the finish, I chose teak oil. A combination of linseed oil and tung oil, teak oil offers both high absorption into the wood and excellent protection against moisture and sunlight, all of which are important since this bench seat is going to be exposed to the elements. I'll need to clean the wood and reapply oil every couple of years, but the durability of the mahogany along with the protection of the oil should help this piece last for several years. I mask off all the parts of the wood where I'll be applying glue, as the oil will affect the glue's ability to form a lasting bond with the wood. Then I apply a generous coat of oil to each piece. The wood soaks up the oil so quickly that on the first application, there was literally no oil remaining to wipe off. Because this is the first time oil is being applied to this wood, the recommendation is at least 3 layers. And another nice feature of teak oil is that the drying time between applications is only 4 to 6 hours. So it's possible to get all 3 layers on over the span of just 1 or 2 days. The final curing of the finish takes up to a month, so you still have to be careful about how much exposure it gets to the elements. With the final layer of oil applied and dried, it's on to final assembly. This is where my second self-imposed dilemma showed itself. The oil soaking into the wood actually caused the pieces to swell slightly, and despite my cleverly executed plan of taping and labeling all the parts to make the final assembly a breeze, I found myself having to use clamps in order to persuade drill holes to line up properly, and had to assemble, disassemble, and reassemble several times with some pieces to get the right fit. That said, everything did eventually get into place, and at last it was time. I took the finished bench seat to its final destination, and again, after some more compensation for the effects of the oil, the new bench seat was finally in place and ready. Well, the bench seat is done. I think it looks great. I like it. My wife likes it. Most importantly, it does what it's meant to do. It's comfortable to sit on. I'm pretty confident that the mahogany and the teak oil are going to hold up well to the weather, and I suspect that this bench seat is probably going to outlast the metal frame from the original park bench. Only time will tell. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe down below, and thanks for stopping by.